Hey everyone, I'm Julie Gunlock, your host for the 7th episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. For those new to the program, this podcast is focused on how parents should custom tailor their parenting style to fit what's best for their families, themselves, and most importantly, their kids. So today we're going to be talking about kids and screen time. That seems like a subject on a lot of people's minds. And to talk about that with me is Naomi Schaefer-Riley, who is with us now. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. I am so excited to talk to you about this. And before we get too much into it, I do want to give people sort of a quick bio. Naomi is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She's also a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, who actually sponsors this podcast. Naomi focuses on child welfare issues and foster care issues. She specifically analyzes the role of faith-based civic and community organizations in changing the foster care and adoption services landscape. Truly important work, and I really encourage everyone to read what she's written on that issue. Sometimes it can be a hard read. But Naomi does not just focus on one issue. She has written on interfaith marriage, higher education, faith in general, and even the condition of the American Indian communities in America, another really tough subject. I'm a huge fan of your books, Naomi, and everything that I think you really deeply look into issues, and you give some great analysis. And this issue is particularly important to parents. And even on that, I mean, first of all, I should say that Naomi has written 6 books and is raising, and she and her husband have 3 children. So I don't get how you do it all. Her book on screen time, I can't even do laundry. Her book on screen time is called Be a Parent, Please, which I love. We have to talk about your title. Be a Parent, Please, Stop Banning Seesaws and Start Banning Snapchat. So, Naomi, great to have you here. This obviously is a big subject right now with parents with a lot of school districts, including my own. I know your kids go to a private school, so I don't specifically know their situation, but my school is all virtual. So I think screen time is something that all parents are concerned about any day of the week. You wrote your book in 2018. It was a very popular book. Obviously, parents were concerned about it, but now it's totally different. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about what inspired you to first write the book, but then also, how have your feelings changed, or how do you think parents' sort of feelings on this issue have changed?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Julie, and I'm excited to talk to you. You're one of my favorite people to talk to, and thanks to IWF for sponsoring your podcast. I'm excited to listen to it, too. So I would say that my interest in this probably began when my kids were much younger. So my oldest I have a 13, 11, and an 8-year-old, and my interest in this really began when my youngest was just, in preschool, and I just remember just a lot of scenes where adults would be trying to talk to each other, and their first reaction in order to get time to be able to talk to each other was to just hand the child, however young, in a stroller, a phone. And it was just like, oh, look here, I'm just buying silence. I just thought, well, it seems to be super effective, and yet I wonder if this is such a good idea.
Right.
And so, as my kids got a little bit older, we sort of wondered, how are we gonna, balance this, and when is the appropriate time to give screens and when is not? And it's not like I was gonna be a parent who was always plopping my kid in front of the TV, but I really want to understand the research behind screens and understand how they affected kids' social and emotional and intellectual development. I would say that things are not great. They don't look good. And so I looked at a lot of different aspects of this. I think people try to make a lot of distinctions about the different kinds of screen time, like is it educational or is it interactive? And what I sort of decided after looking at all the research was that I kind of threw it all into one bucket, because I do think that what screens do above all else is they take time away from other things. And you and I both know this well, time outside, time playing with other people in person, time reading books. And so the extent to which it really kind of interferes with all of those things, I think it's a problem. And then I began to sort of wonder how I was going to form rules around screens. And what I found that it was, I compared it in a couple of articles and in the book to dieting, which is sort of you have got to stick to the rules for a significant amount of time before you start to kind of break them here and there. And that's really hard.
Is that why I'm failing? Oh, this is see with Naomi. With Naomi, you get all sorts of tips about all sorts of different things.
Advice. Yeah.
All right, go on. I'm sorry.
No, and I think, it seemed very harsh when parents found out, like, oh, your kids don't get screens at all except on the weekends. Parents would be like, how do you enforce that? That's crazy. And I have to actually be like, it's actually much easier to enforce that than to enforce you can be on screens from 6:20 to 8:35, and then we'll have an argument at 8:35 about whether you need 5 more minutes. Instead, I could be like, oh, it's Tuesday. Sorry. Have a great day.
I just have to interrupt you there for 1 second and say it is astonishing to me the number of people who say exactly that to me. How in the world do you enforce it? Well, you've got a great tip there. Just make like a blanket, like not on school days, not during the week. But I also feel like have you tried being a parent? Like the title of your article, like, have you tried saying no? My husband always says that. He always says, like, did you try saying no? It's just amazing to me that people sort of forget their role as parents is to set these rules. That's sort of basic.
Right, and we set them in all sorts of other ways. I mean, your kids probably don't ask you for chocolate cake for breakfast because they kind of know what the answer is going to be. But frankly, if you said yes tomorrow, the following day they would probably ask. And I think that is what, that's sort of the very practical sort of key that I came away from just talking to lots of parents and teachers and psychologists and my own experience about how to limit it. I would say that in answer to your second question about kind of where we are now, I think what happened at the beginning of the lockdown in March is that parents sort of entered what I called like emergency parenting mode. So we've all been in a situation where we give a kid a phone because suddenly we find ourselves like, at the doctor's office and there's a 2-hour wait, or we find ourselves like stuck in a traffic jam for, hours on end because there's been an accident and there's nothing else. And you give the kid the phone because frankly, like everyone in the car is done and you just have to. And I think people sort of entered that emergency parenting mode in March, and then, April, May, June came, and they never quite got out of it.
Right.
And, I wrote a piece sort of early on saying, like, okay, guys, like, you're going to have to understand we're kind of in a new normal here. And, not to say that you wouldn't maybe add a little more screen time to your day as a result of the fact that we're all home and driving each other crazy. But once you sort of, start to change the rules on kids, they're going to start to have these new emergency parenting expectations. That is where I think things really went off the rails.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because I wrote a piece in June, and it was sort of a long form essay about how my kids were really struggling. Right. And it was very personal, and I didn't have a lot of data in it. It wasn't very academic. It was really just my own story and my kids and how they fared during the switch over to virtual learning. And one of the lines that I said in that, and because, I am strict on screen time, I do like you, I sort of do a blanket ban. And then there is time on the weekends, but they have friends and they want to play. And so I let them play a little bit on the weekends, but they have to earn it. They have to do certain things. But when they went to the all virtual and they were on class or in class all the time, and let me just be clear, they weren't in class all the time. I would catch them on YouTube. I learned how to block a lot of these things. They would find ways around it. Their friends would send them through Bing if I blocked Google and not Bing. And then it was so frustrating. But like the idea that, oh yes, kids are just going to sit there, and I mean, I can't hover constantly. But the line that I wrote, I said, I felt like because the school was frankly, it was just a free-for-all, I felt like I was sharing custody with an ex that didn't share my parenting philosophy.
That's actually a huge issue, by the way, in divorces and separations now. Like, and of course, it's like the dad who's always giving more screen time. Like, I'm sorry to stereotype, but it's like, here, have an iPad, and like the mom becomes the bad guy. It's really terrible, but it's a really common story I hear. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No. That's exactly what I want. I think that's the problem is, your book is saying be the parent, please, but and really do parent, just parent, do like the basics of parenting and tell your kid, no, they're not going to get a screen. But I think that's one problem that I've had. I mean, I've actually managed to turn it around to my kids. I've sat down with them and I've said, look, you're bug-eyed, because, two of my kids do virtual. And I said, and I'm homeschooling my third. And I said, you're bug-eyed when you get off that screen. You cannot, because some want to watch TV, some want to watch, a YouTube video or whatever. And I say, first of all, there's no screens on the weekends, but also, you can't even watch TV. You got to go outside, get some fresh air, ride your bike. And they have been really good. My kids are like, they sort of know not to argue too much. But again, I feel like it's a little tough because their school is saying, here's a screen, sit on it for 6 hours a day. And I think some parents might have just kind of given up. I mean, how do you challenge that,
Yeah, I think, before the lockdown, I was a big fan of sort of really parents getting involved and asking schools, like, why can you explain to us your theory behind screen time? Like, explain to us why my child is doing, multiplication tables on this app instead of just doing multiplication tables. Like, I want to understand what you think is the added benefit of using a screen, because if they can do it just as well without a screen, then I would just prefer to stick with that. Like, why can't I just have some worksheets? What is the big deal, except that you think that the kid is going to find it more fun? But frankly, a lot of times it just means that it's that much harder to kind of keep the kids at, attention with other things when they do actually have to sit down and read a real book. But I think that, I encourage parents to even talk to their school districts about, like, so, who is paying for all this technology that you're bringing into the classroom, and what kind of arrangement do you have with them? And have you looked at any of the research behind whether this is actually adding, like, even the research behind how much more kids get out of listening to things when they're taking notes by hand instead of taking notes on a laptop? Fascinating to me. How many high schools are actually taking that into consideration instead of just saying, okay, everybody take out your Chromebooks and you can start taking notes now.
Yeah.
To me, we need to be holding the school's feet to the fire on these questions. But here we are, a lot of schools are doing remote learning. So my older two have half remote learning. And it really is, talk about bug-eyed. I mean, especially because they're in middle school. And so in addition to the hours that they're spending on screen, then they're doing hours of homework on the screen afterwards. And so, yes, like, you have to be the parent and say, like, go outside, like, stop looking at the screen, like, even, and the thing is, once they have the laptop, like, then it becomes you have to check in every 5 minutes to find out if what they're doing is actually what they're supposed to be doing, if they're just kind of playing around, if they're required to be doing that now, or whether it's something that could be put off to later, because it's like you and I, like, we could, sit around all night and, not go to bed until 1 o'clock in the morning, just looking at crap online. And but the thing that I always tell people is that, we, like, our generation knows what it means to be bug-eyed. We know when we've had enough. We know when we've wasted huge amounts of time. And we also long for certain things. Like, we know how nice it feels to be able to go for a walk and get fresh air. We know what it's like to sit on the couch with a book uninterrupted for hours at a time. Like, and so we will naturally sort of try to, I think, get back those experiences at some point. But if your kids have not been
never had it,
kind of raised that way, and they don't understand those pleasures, it's really hard, I think, for, like, you to announce to a 30-year-old, hey, wouldn't you rather be outside or reading a book? Like, they don't have any recollection of what that would be like.
Yeah. Well, it's also, they don't have the self-discipline. There is something about that, which really bothers me, is they treat these kids, like you say, like they're 30-year-olds. Like, they have some sense of, I mean, my children, and I want to back up just a little bit and say, it is astonishing to me what has been turned into a screen lesson. My child has reading, they have a reading class, right? And they go in and he has this database of books he can read online. And it just amazes me that a school district can hand out, now they're giving food out to anyone. You don't even have to qualify for free and reduced price lunches. That's a whole nother issue. But these school districts can give out, food, and can give out a whole bunch of other things, but they can't send a book home to a kid or tell the parents that of means, like, if you can go to Amazon and buy a $3 book. We have a lot of kids' books. So I make him go upstairs and choose the book that he's reading, at night. And he curls up in a chair, because he doesn't have to be online during this time, and he reads. And that's a little thing that, to me, kind of gets him used to holding a book, sitting in a comfortable place, not sitting, stick straight up at the, dining room table. And if I weren't directing him to do that, he wouldn't do it. He doesn't have the self-discipline. And he certainly doesn't have the self-discipline I mentioned earlier to stay in class, to stay focused. He can email his friends. He can get, again, he can look at different applications, whatever,
Right.
if it's YouTube or whatever. So that's the thing that bothers me too, is that they've advanced this technology on kids who really do not have the maturity to control themselves.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And it's going to take a long time. I mean, like I said, adults barely have the ability to control themselves when it comes to these devices. And I think that's the other thing too, by the way. I often hear like parents saying, well, I feel bad telling him to get off the device because I'm not getting off the device, or like I'm setting, and I fine, like maybe you should change your habits too. But I also think kids are different. Like, you're not, you're not letting your kids drive or drink or all sorts of other things either. And a little hypocrisy here, frankly, does not bother me. Like kids are different. Their brains work differently. And maybe they should, maybe you do spend too much time on the screen, but that doesn't mean that therefore, you should, let your kids spend too much time on the screen as a result. Like, get over it. I don't know.
My children went through a very brief, and I cannot stress the word brief enough, of guilting me for being on my phone. And then when I had the conversation with them about how I was going to, fine. I'll go to an office and you'll go to the aftercare at school. And I mean, I actually faked that I had the paperwork and I was filling it out. And man, they were so upset. They stopped guilting me after that, because I pointed out, look, I'm on my phone because I'm working. I mean, I wasn't. I was probably, buying something on J. Crew. But the point is that that you're right. Kids and parents are different, and kids need to understand that. But I also think it is important to have some self-discipline around your kids.
Yeah.
I try to not do that thing where you can scroll endlessly on Facebook and like look at videos. I mean, and I follow Jacques Pepin and some great like food videos, and it's fun, but I think it's really important to have that self-discipline too. And, that's what your book was so great about. I mean, it was like, be the parent. I mean, you talk about one thing, and I kind of would like to talk about this too, because in the midst of this, my kids are getting older. I have a 13-year-old too, and I don't know about you, but I feel like my kids are the only ones that don't have a smartphone. At least my 13-year-old. And this doesn't happen with my 12-year-old.
That just changed for us this month.
Well, that's interesting, and I'd love to talk to you about that. And that seems like, I think I don't remember what recommendation, or if you gave a recommendation in your book specifically on an age, but what's the research on that? What are your feelings on that?
So I think that, for me, I think a lot of this is going to be kid dependent. Do you think that your kid, has the self-discipline? And also there are going to be questions about school. Like, do you think that the school is actually, our schools have rules that say you may not be looking at your phone during school. Yep. And I'm actually fairly confident in both cases that it's not happening. Right. And so, but I would have to say, like, if there is if there's a situation where you're not sure if that's happening, and there was a point at one of the schools that my kid was attending where the girls were all sitting around at lunch. They weren't, going outside or anything. They were just sitting there texting each other, or like playing on their phones. They're like, this is not an acceptable environment for me to, send my kid with a phone. I would say, you have to be willing as a parent to take on a whole new set of responsibilities. It is a time suck to be able to not only worry about checking your own phone, but now you have to worry about checking somebody else's. Yeah. The kids do not have any social media at all. Right. And so, definitely I think, frankly, the phone and the internet access, which is very hard to sort of control from the phone, allows all sorts of things to come into the phone. I say this, now families allow all sorts of things to come in through the back door that they would never allow through the front door. And so just being conscious of that, and are you prepared to take on that level of commitment? Yeah. And how mature is your kid? Are they sneaky when it comes to other things? Like, and are they capable of putting the thing down? Like, I can tell you that my daughter, who's now she's 13 and a half, I can tell you she genuinely loves reading, and I will tell you that there are many times where I find like the phone somewhere on the other side of the house and her engrossed in a novel. And I feel totally confident, as long as that continues to happen, that she has not become too engrossed in her phone. If I see that the phone is replacing all of the other things that she enjoys doing, then forget about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I'm still at the phase where my son's friends text me and then I have to hand him my phone. And so I lose my phone for a few minutes. So he texts to his friends. I actually don't think my son is ready for that. And I do think that it would sort of suck up all of his time. I think he would, and he's sneaky. I mean, I love him. I feel bad. I feel like I shouldn't say this stuff about him, but he's a 13-year-old. He's a little sneaky. And so I'm not ready for that. But that's what I love about this conversation is sort of a good representation of the podcast itself, which is Bespoke Parenting. I really think that people need to make these decisions, and that are best for themselves and their kids, and based on their kids. And like you said, I sort of came to this, and I kind of hate the word parenting philosophy, but I kind of came to this belief system because of early on talking and reading Lenore Skenazy, who I know you're familiar with, and Lenore's great about that. She's a free range parenting advocate. She says, get your kids out there, let them explore the world. But certainly, if you've got a really nervous kid or an immature kid, she's not going to say like, oh, let them walk, 6 miles to the mall. Didn't I just date myself by saying walk to the mall? Nobody says that anymore.
Nobody goes to the mall.
So Gen X. In any second now, I'm going to bring up, Eddie Van Halen dying. Any second. But I will tell you, I like that is that you do need to make these decisions. But one thing, or, based on the kid.
I wouldn't, but by the way, I'm a big fan of wait until eighth. I don't know, whether your listeners are familiar with that. I really do think like eighth grade, if you don't know, wait until at least eighth grade to get your kid a phone, because I do think that there has to be some level of maturity there. And if you're going to sit here and tell me like, I think my third grader is super mature and able to handle this, I'll just laugh at you and be like, no, they're not. And I actually have mature kids, so I know what a mature third grader looks like, and forget about it. Exactly. But I also think, as much as you're right that people need to make these decisions individually, it also helps to have a critical mass of people who are making similar decisions for their kids. And I think there's so much pressure now. Everybody has a phone, mom. Everyone, jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, whatever it is, that I think parents need to have a sense that there might be somebody else out there who's also worried about things. And what I like about the wait until eighth model is they actually have, I don't know whether your school has done this, but our school has, done this thing where you can sign onto this pledge that says, I'll wait until eighth. And what they do is, as soon as at least, I think, 10 families in the grade have signed it, then they send it around. And so now you're aware of like 9 other families that have made a similar decision. And I think it gives parents a little bit more of the, backbone that they might need to be able to make this decision for their kid too.
Well, listen, I don't, I want to stay on this subject, but we've only got you for a short while longer. And I wanted to talk just in the next few minutes that we have left. You wrote a really provocative piece in commentary called "My Kids and Their Elite Education and Racism: How Rye Country Day School Reflects the Madness of Our Times." I want you to talk about that, just because for the listeners who the people who are listening, I want them to read it. And I really, if you can just give a quick, this is an amazing piece. First of all, have PTA meetings gotten awkward, or parent-teacher conference?
We left. I was actually not going to write that piece and then try to stay. So a lot of people have asked me that, and I feel like I should make that clear. We were done. So I transferred my kids to this, it's a private secular school near us that has a very good reputation. It has a good reputation especially for academic rigor. And I knew that I was going to be in for some nonsense politics, but I never imagined what actually happened. And so there were lots of instances that people can read about in the article. But I would say, my 6th grade son was coming home with, having regularly listened to lectures on microaggressions. He had to come home and tell me that, we learned today that just because someone is wearing a dress, that doesn't mean they're a woman. But there was a lot of race discussion there, and I felt like it was the constant backdrop. There was a speaker who came in for Martin Luther King Day, an ex-felon, someone who'd been convicted of armed robbery, wanted to come in and talk to the kids, middle school kids, mind you, about bail reform. Yeah. And it was insane. I just thought, not only is this ridiculously political, but why you need to celebrate Martin Luther King Day by having an ex-felon come in. Like, this is the example of, the shining example of the black person that you want to show them. But my kids, my husband is black, and so my kids, often were the recipients of invitations to come to diversity meetings and students of color meetings, and and they turn them down. But mostly, I think the thing that sort of got me more than anything else was this kind of idea that we're going to sacrifice the academic rigor for the politics. So there was one meeting we had, where my daughter was, wanted to get into a higher math class, and she, asked for more, difficult work so she could get into the higher math class next year. And, not only were we met with shock that, this might damage her self-esteem or undermine her life balance.
Oh, wow.
But then the meeting ended with them suggesting that she come to like our Girls of Color pizza meeting, this week or something. And I just thought, I am not here to talk about that. Like, I'm here to talk about math. And everything for you is about race.
Right. Well, and it drives home to these kids that they're seeing your skin color. I mean, you're not, the constant invitations to join these clubs but that are based somehow on race is just, it's a strange message. I mean, I've been affected by this myself. I pulled 2 of my kids out of the public schools. My youngest is still in the elementary school, which really is very, I mean, it's a sweet little neighborhood school, and we haven't seen too much in the way of the race issues, but we've seen some really disturbing things, and I'm obviously, I'm sure a lot of listeners are aware of the 1619 project. The superintendent in my school district, in the public school district, announced that he plans to deploy that into the school. And my kids are a little bit older. They're both in middle. The olders are both in middle school. And this is where I feel like, kids really pay attention, and it's really critical. And I've heard from other people that some of the curriculums have already started to change the way they're teaching them. And so, again, I felt like you did, where it takes away from sort of, the sort of basics they should be learning. I don't object to these conversations happening, that obviously talking about George Washington being a slave owner, or many of the other issues, but it really does take over. And again, some of the activism I was seeing on the teachers' parts and on the administrators' parts was making me nervous enough that, I mean, for us, it was a really big move. It was sort of sudden for us to do the second child, who's now in a Catholic school. But I think parents are really sort of getting fed up with this stuff, getting frustrated with this stuff, and I think it's getting, like you mentioned, like, you never expected it to be this bad. I think it's accelerated. I think that
I absolutely think so. I mean, toward the end of the year, like, every Zoom meeting had a Black Lives Matter fist and the rest of it. I think that's accelerating, and I also think the danger for me, and this is the part I sort of get to at the end of the piece, is like, I think, we live in a lovely community, and my kids have been totally embraced by, I mean, they were at a Jewish day school. They've been totally embraced by, friends and neighbors and, our synagogue, and, they've never been made to feel like they're different. And I just think that, what's going to happen is all of these lovely, nice adults and children that we know, are going to be made to feel like they have to walk on eggshells, because anything they say to us, could be a microaggression. It could be wrong. It could be the wrong thing. So what's your natural inclination if that's it? If you have to walk on eggshells around someone all the time, you start to think, maybe I should just avoid this interaction altogether. And to me, that's the biggest danger here. I think Americans are, hugely tolerant people, and, interracial marriage and interracial adoption, all these things have been going up for years, for decades. And I just think people are going to take a step back and be like, I don't know if I should be doing this. Like, I could get, hammered. I could lose my job. I could say the wrong thing, and that would just be the end. And to me, like, I don't understand how these people don't see that coming.
Yeah. Well, yes. And, and then you have, you mentioned earlier, I've really encouraged parents to get involved and to, be a voice and ask tough questions. Well, I did that when my superintendent mentioned on video. This was hilarious. He actually denied he said it. And so I sent him the video, and I even told him, go to 55.23. Like, I told him exactly where he said that 1619 was going to be deployed. And he's like, no, I didn't say it. Anyway, so I do this, and he writes back to me in this. It was insanely aggressive. It was upsetting to me. He was very he was very angry at me. Now, when I sent him that saying I'm concerned about 1619, I mentioned, John McWhorter. I mentioned the scholars and historians who have objected to it. I mentioned Clarence Page. I mentioned the 1776, and it was definitely giving it to them like, hey, you may want to check out this criticism. I was not, the popular phrase, I was not a Karen. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't angry. I was just trying to give them information. He responded so viciously back to me. And then a school board member called me a racist. And it was so upsetting to me that I spent a couple days and I'm sensitive about this stuff. I mean, I should be tougher, but it jarred me. It upset me. Yeah. And then right after the George Floyd, the death of George Floyd, the same superintendent got on a Zoom call and basically talked about, this was to the parent community, talked about how he's constantly having to deal with microaggressions and racism, and sort of suggesting that, he faces all this horrible treatment by parents, which was a signal to parents. And he said, parents complain to me and I have to deal with racism every day. It signaled to parents, don't bother. I'm you're going to be painted. And around here, I live in a very liberal neighborhood. Nobody wants that label. So
no, God forbid.
It's a real way to shut down. And so I worry about parents getting involved. And I think that there really has been, parents are discouraged from doing that. So
there is a real silencing going on here. And it's not just like this broad thing we call cancel culture. Like it's right. It's what people know, people have learned to avoid. It's the speech you're never going to hear because people, know better, and they just know to just keep their mouth shut to begin with. And that the example has been set by all of these other people who've been canceled. And now just, who wants to just go from being a private citizen who expressed a slight concern to a school committee member to becoming like the town racist? Right. And, nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. And, it does carry there is retribution. When you start to get, you start to think, oh gosh, are my kids gonna, some families worry about sports placement. I didn't grow up in sports, but you think about how you grew up. I did not grow up in sports. My maiden name is Vincent. We are an awkward people, and we do not play sports. But I have this very sporty kid. And so people have said to me, I've actually been warned. People have said, don't complain too much because they'll remember you. And so that's the kind of thing that just makes, if you're advocating for a certain thing or, raising an alarm about certain thing and that harms your kid, that is a way to silence. That's a way to silence me. It hasn't worked yet, but that works on people.
No, I absolutely feel it. I was talking to somebody who was trying to start a conservative paper on campus. The paper had been defunct for a while, and he called me for some advice because I worked on a conservative paper when I was in college, and he said he asked several people to write for the paper, and he said the first thing they asked is if they could use pseudonyms.
Wow. Whoa. Yeah.
So that'll tell you where we are right now.
That will tell you. Well, listen, I know that I have to bring this to an end, which is sad because I have so much fun talking to you, and I think that we've just only scraped the top of the issues here. But you are wonderful to talk to about these issues. I really hope people will look up Naomi's book. Naomi, do you want to just give us a little bit your Twitter or any projects you're working on right now?
Sure. Yeah. No, you can go find any of my articles at naomiriley.com, and also I have a website, AEI Scholar page. My Twitter handle is Naomi S. Riley, where I mostly tweet my articles and occasionally retweet some other funny things. And then I have a book that's going to come out in the spring about child welfare. It's called No Way to Treat a Child. So I hope everyone will check that out when it comes out.
Great. Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on. And I hope you'll come on again because, again, I think we have a lot more to talk about. You've been great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Julie. Take care.
Thanks, everyone, for being here for another episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. If you enjoyed this episode or like the podcast in general, please leave a rating or review on iTunes. This helps ensure that the podcast reaches as many listeners as possible. If you haven't subscribed to the Bespoke Parenting Hour on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, please do so you won't miss an episode. Don't forget to share this episode and let your friends know that they can get Bespoke episodes on their favorite podcast app. From all of us here at the Independent Women's Forum, thanks for listening.